previously in the United States, the entire legacy media news landscape was dominated by Twitter. It's a beast that people have to reckon with, but if I had to choose between a private company like Twitter existing and a government arresting somebody like Graham Linehan for tweets, I gotta be behind Twitter. I mean, not that I agree necessarily with what's being said on it, but you can't have government control over it, can you?
Hello and welcome back to UnHerd. Today we're asking, what is the Elon Muskification of politics? And where is it leading? What kind of effect and how profound is his transformation of Twitter into the beast now called X? And what has it done to the public conversation here and around the world? Well, when thinking about this, there was only one person I really wanted to talk about it with. That is the world famous journalist, author, campaigner for free speech, Matt Taibbi. Welcome, Matt.
How are you doing? Good to see you, Freddie.
So the culture war, it feels like, has reached this febrile state that when we were trying to find someone to talk about this topic with, there were loads of people who were just diehard anti-Musk to the end, and loads of people who will defend him no matter what. And in some cases, their career depends on defending him. It was kind of difficult to find someone who would just give an honest assessment. I am delighted we have arrived at you, Matt. My first question is, as someone who appeared to be initially enthusiastic about the arrival of Elon Musk on the political scene, his purchase of Twitter, you worked with him on the Twitter files, you then seem to have become a bit more disillusioned. Talk us through that journey.
Well, I was initially enthusiastic about Elon purchasing Twitter. I didn't know a whole lot about Elon Musk before that moment. I wasn't someone who paid a lot of attention to Tesla or any of his other exploits until then. But as far as Twitter went, people have to remember that before Elon took over Twitter, there was a significant problem with digital censorship that was kind of a new phenomenon in the United States, capped off by sort of the remarkable incident just before the election in 2020, when Twitter and Facebook locked out a story about Hunter Biden that seemed to have been prompted by a request from law enforcement. And we had never seen anything like that in the United States before. We don't have like D notices and things like that to suppress information. So when he came in promising that there would be a free speech platform and it would return to that and that he would allow all legal speech, we were naturally excited. And then when he started talking about, well, there were rumors that he was going to open up the files of Twitter to reporters, I kind of raised my hand publicly and volunteered to do that. And I got a call and worked on that story. There was a significant progression there, I think, in two directions. One was learning about Elon's true feelings about free speech, and the other was the material that was in the Twitter files, which was extremely revelatory in a different direction.
Right, so let's just start with the Twitter files component, because that, in a way, exposes the old regime, doesn't it? This is why, and I was 100% with you on this. I mean, UnHerd, we have been campaigning for free speech for years. You know, we have also come up against what was a very opaque and scary set of obstacles to normal political discourse since at least 2020 and possibly before, on topics like COVID and BLM and the trans controversy and all of those things, where you couldn't say really normal political things without risking censorship. So I was very excited, as you were, that something better might come along. In the Twitter files, that's not what this interview is about, but just to summarize it for listeners who may not be aware, what did you find out?
The most important story that we discovered is that there was a significant formalized channel of communication between the American law enforcement and intelligence services and all the platforms. They had regular meetings. There were formalized recommendations on content that were sent out in kind of a subterranean way to, you know, probably 24 different companies. And this was something, again, we hadn't seen before. Now, there was an aspect that we only caught a little bit of at the end of the Twitter files that is relevant to what's going on in Europe. We started to see communications about the United States maybe integrating with European regulations like the Code of Practice on Disinformation and potentially the coming Digital Services Act. But mostly we learned about this American thing, which has been kind of suppressed since then.
So just to spell it out, the scandal, the thing we were all so upset about was that the government and law enforcement and federal agencies were too close to what was supposedly a free media platform. It was in a kind of idea of a properly functioning democracy, the media should be separate from the government.
Especially in the United States, because our First Amendment system does not permit even a whiff of that, right? Like we're not even, the government doesn't even theoretically have the right to be in the business of speech recommendations, right? So it's different than it would be in other countries.
So fast forward to end of 2022, Elon Musk purchases Twitter. Already by the beginning of 2023, he is becoming very political. At some point after the election, he formally becomes associated with the government. And I guess that's my first question. At what point in that story did you start thinking, hold on, what we were upset about was that the government was too close to Twitter. Now, the second most important person in the government, arguably, at the time, owns and controls the platform. Is this better?
Well, first of all, I have to back up and talk about what happened with all of us at the Twitter files. So one of the things that happened during the reporting of that story is that we discovered that Elon had, let's just say, a very indifferent attitude towards free speech. He suddenly started banning or de-amplifying accounts that he didn't like, and that put me in a very awkward position as a reporter, because was the story Elon or was the story the material I was working on? I thought the material was so important, I didn't say anything about it. Then finally, he sort of asked me to leave my home at Substack and move to Twitter during the reporting of the story. And I said I couldn't do that ethically because then we would have a financial relationship, at which point he de-amplified my account, and it's been de-amplified ever since. So my experience,
shadow banned, you might say.
I've been sort of significantly shadow banned to the point where it's cost me an enormous amount of money since early 2023. Now, so knowing that about Elon, that he has this very personalized idea about speech regulation, and look, and it's his platform, it's that attitude of his was still not as bad as what we had seen previously, which was a relationship with the government. As you point out, that changes when he became part of the government after the election, and now suddenly we're dealing with something that is a new phenomenon, which is a government employee in charge of one of the most important platforms in the world.
Yeah, and they hide behind this idea that he was never technically a government employee. He was a special government employee, didn't receive a salary or something. I mean, he attended cabinet meetings, in fact, seemed to run them at some points. He was definitely part of the government. Fast forward a little bit further, and his domination of the platform only increased. So although you were aware of sort of quite subtle behind-the-scenes interventions he was making about who would be shadow banned or de-amplified, and we also had some of those experiences directly with Elon, things then have become, in the year and a half since, just ever more, well, exaggerated. That there is this one character who is both the owner-proprietor, also the rule setter, and also the most followed person on this network, such that if you follow him, your entire feed is completely different to if you don't. It is very hard to see this anymore as a free speech platform in any kind of neutral sense. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I do look at it a little differently, though. It's still a private company, so how different is it really from CBS, owning a gigantic media conglomerate and, its executives making decisions about which things they're going to highlight and which stories they're going to suppress and that sort of thing. Obviously, internet platforms have a much greater reach. They're able to amplify and de-amplify conversations at the micro level and distort realities in ways that people watching traditional media would never believe. But I just think that phenomenon is kind of consistent across social media now. Like if you go to Blue Sky, it's got the same kind of flavor of a politicized landscape that X does. It's just in a different direction. They all do that. I think what people need to understand is that they have to become literate about how to use social media and to understand what the particular influences are of that platform. And clearly on Elon's, it's a weird one, right? Like, as you say, he's sort of the Wizard of Oz of X, and his account is the all-powerful medium through which everything is understood. And we don't have that so much on Facebook, but something similar is going on behind the scenes. It's just that it's kind of more overt with Elon.
So net, do you think we are in a better or worse situation today than we were, let's say, 3 years ago? I mean, taken in sum, all of the collection of net speech platforms that we have, just the ability to have like a functioning political conversation, do you think we have taken a step forward or a step back?
Well, let me put it this way. I thought the direction that we were heading in 2024 and 2023 was more dangerous than the place that we're in now. So right now in Europe, they're building kind of overtly a monochromatic, officially controlled media landscape through the prism of the Digital Services Act and all the individual speech control laws, in each of the countries. So Germany has NetzDG, the UK has the Online Safety Act, all of those different laws. There was a moment where it looked like the United States, as well as Canada, as well as Australia, as well as New Zealand, and every other Western country was going to move into a single unified landscape, and that was terrifying to me. So the outcome of having two bad models for the internet as opposed to one is slightly better. But I don't think we're in a good place in terms of speech in the United States.
And what about specifically X? I mean, I'm sitting here in the UK, and we feel the impact of X every day now in our politics. It is very different. It used to be possible to say, oh, that's only Twitter. And among journalists, that would be quite a high status remark. Oh, we don't want a commission based on Twitter. It's just Twitter, it's not the real world. It increasingly feels like the atmosphere that is being driven on Twitter, on X, is actually driving politics here in the UK. The kinds of moods are spilling out because individual politicians are on X. They're trying to win in this new Elon algorithm. Members of all sorts of political parties are playing the game, and it's having a huge outsized impact, I would say.
But how different is that than what was going on Twitter or previously in the United States? The entire legacy media news landscape was dominated by Twitter. So, a handful of journalists who work for a handful of newspapers whose work would be elevated by the algorithms, and conversely, the views of other people like Julian Assange who were algorithmically dumped into groups like is_Russian and de-amplified. That's how we had all sorts of media crazes. It's a beast that people have to reckon with. But if I had to choose between a private company like Twitter existing and a government arresting somebody like Graham Linehan for tweets, I gotta be behind Twitter. I mean, not that I agree necessarily with what's being said on it, but you can't have government control over it, can you?
I think we should get to the UK because it's at the center of our experience here. I just want to throw one other question at you before we do that. There's one detail that I've noticed about X specifically, which is it now has these two feeds. It has a quote-unquote for you feed and then a quote-unquote following feed. And I don't think many people even notice it. I've definitely met and discussed this with people who have never spotted it. But the app defaults you to the for you feed, which is recommended things for you, not necessarily from the people you follow, which I think studies have shown, and certainly my personal experience have shown, is very much more right-coded. It's much more driven. It feels like it has an agenda behind it, whilst the following feed, which is exclusively people you follow, you have actual control over. And my observation is that it actually defaults back to the for you feed after a certain number of days. So you can't even keep it on the following feed. Details like that, to me, are very unsettling because it suggests that precisely that kind of hidden algorithmic manipulation that we were all so upset about in the kind of earlier regime is very much still there. It's just pointing in a different political direction.
Yeah, which is why I have trouble getting worked up about it, because it's the same thing. It's just in a different direction. Now, the old system and the system that I think is still extant on most of the other platforms is just a highly individualized surveillance system. Let's just say that you have here's a graph of all the things in the world that you might be interested in, and the machine detects that there is a spot about this big in this corner of the political universe that you tend to be interested in. What they do in all cases and all other platforms is they just send you material that is entirely within that circle, right? And what it will do, which is really obnoxious and I think nefarious, is that it steadily makes the circle smaller, right? So you see ever more aggressive, more radical, more inciting kinds of content that's at the very center of that circle, because there's an addictive reflex there. It's sort of like chasing a dragon with drugs. They have to keep upping the ante and giving you more and more inciting stuff, always within that circle. Now, in the pre-Elon era, they just did that. It was tailored to whatever your interests were. So if you were a conservative, it just sent you conservative material. If you were a Democrat, it just sent you material that was entirely like about Donald Trump, and it was in there, and they radicalized you that way. People, I don't think, understood that mechanism very well, but that's kind of the way it works.
It does sound, when you put it like that, very dangerous, doesn't it, though? I mean, that's not an argument necessarily for getting governments involved. And I understand your reticence about that, but it's also understandable why people are very anxious about it, that both adults and kids are being fed into this ever-constricting algorithm.
Well, absolutely. Yeah, no. There's an incredible danger there. It's addictive. Like, I mean, people going back all the way to... who was the guy who invented Napster? I forget his name. He talked about the mechanism of giving people a little dopamine hit every time they encounter content that ratifies their belief system. Now, in order to keep that dopamine flow going, you have to continually constrict the circle, and that is how they keep you on the platform. Long before Elon came on the scene, I was interviewing people who had worked for these different platforms, who talked about studying things, details as small as the fact that when you reach into your pocket and your thumb grazes over the waffle pattern on your case, that it triggers something in your brain that makes you happy and gives you another dopamine rush. Like they study this stuff quite intently, and the aim of it is commercial. It's not political. Now, with what Elon might be doing, and I don't know this because I haven't been inside Twitter for quite a long time, but my suspicion is that he's trying to move the algorithm in a direction that's more in tune with what his political ideas are, as opposed to what will just simply attract the most audience, which is what Facebook always did, right?
And you don't find that extra sinister?
I don't see that it's better or worse than either thing, right? Like, in other words, what we tended to see with the previous Twitter is that it was definitely elevating false content to people, and it was doing that, I would say, systematically. In some cases, there was human intervention to do that, in the same way that Elon was doing it. So, for instance, with the vaccine story, right? We had a period in the United States where the platforms were following the dictates of the CDC and the NIH to reduce hesitancy, right? So you would have true content. There would be somebody who actually had a vaccine injury, who actually got myocarditis. It's a true story, and the platforms would suppress it because they deem it to be some sort of misinformation when it's not. I don't see how that's any better than what Elon Musk is doing, right? It's just an institutional version of the same thing.
Before we continue with the video, a brief word from our sponsor. Want to know something wild about stem cells? They are like tiny repair crews in your body and go and fix things that need to be fixed. Check out Dr. Eric Berg, one of the most watched health educators on YouTube. He's been talking about this for years.
A stem cell is kind of like this reserve cell that can pretty much change into anything that you need. They're using it now to regenerate fibrosis, which then allows the heart muscle function to improve by 30%. They can do the same thing with liver fibrosis and damaged brain cells. They're getting great results stimulating new cartilage in your joint. Some people are using it for autoimmune diseases like MS, and also to help rejuvenate skin cells to actually make the skin young again. There's also stem cells for cancer. It's very important to understand how to keep that stem cell population at the highest level.
The thing about stem cells is that they are crazy expensive. $50,000 for one stem cell injection. Most people don't have that kind of cash. I certainly don't, but luckily the guys at Black Forest have developed cocoa flavanols. Studies have been done to show that the flavanols in cocoa stimulate stem cells to come out of your bone marrow like bees coming out of a beehive in your bloodstream. And they go and find whatever needs to be repaired. If it's in your heart, liver, or skin, they'll fix it. Harvard scientist Dr. William Li actually backs this up. Check it out.
Well, clinical studies have been done with high flavanol cocoa to show that in like men who are in their 60s with heart disease, they could actually just have 2 cups of dark chocolate hot cocoa a day for a month.
Yeah.
And they doubled the amount of stem cells in their bloodstream, and their circulation improved measurably. And then what's even more important and impressive is that there was a study called the Cosmos study that was completed recently that showed that eating high flavanol cocoa decreases the risk of cardiovascular death.
Yeah.
Right, over a period
like a statin.
Like a statin, right. Exactly. Except made with by eating the same thing that you use to make chocolate.
That's
so we're
incredible.
not telling people to go out to have chocolate, which is a confection, which has got a lot of sugar and all kinds of other stuff in it.
Yeah.
But it's the stuff underneath it, the core of it.
This isn't your average cocoa. It's a stem cell power-up. You can mix it into your coffee or protein shakes, and it tastes great. No sugar, only 20 calories. If you're experiencing significant aging, slow recovery, weak immunity, or just feeling off, blame your lazy stem cells. But guess what? Cocoa flavanols can help you activate them, like a fountain of youth, all in a scoop. Studies show that cocoa flavanols increase stem cell circulation by over 100%. Now that's pretty good. Go to my link in the description or pinned comment down below, and for the next 48 hours, you can get a whopping 40% off for 48 hours only. Thanks to Black Forest for sponsoring this video.
Let's talk about Europe and the UK. So from my perspective is, I'm just going to put it out there, that in part because of the very distorted picture that emerges on X specifically, and because so many people connected to the Trump administration are apparently addicted to X, and I'm thinking of the vice president downwards, there is a widespread sense that things are even worse in the UK than they actually are. You know, I'm living here. On all of these questions, the level of crime, the degree to which the immigration problem is making day-to-day life untenable, the concerns around free speech, you know, imminent decline of the country, all of these things. On each one, there are serious things to worry about. Like, these are real issues, and I don't want to denigrate them or dismiss them. But when I see these kind of insane exaggerations every day being absolutely gobbled up by our American friends and like spat out almost with a degree of smugness, like, hey, look how, you know, basket case crazy the UK is. We're kind of more sane compared to them. Part of me thinks, no, you're not. That's been my experience. How have you perceived it?
Maybe it's just a difference in point of view because of, you know, I was raised in a different tradition, legally, politically, right? So we expect to have crazy media in the United States. We expect people to be nuts and to say things that are completely untrue in some cases. The break on that in our society is litigation, the private libel laws, and throughout my lifetime, those have been always been very effective, right? Like, it takes a while to get there sometimes, but for the most part, the notion that there are going to be private actors who are going to play up certain things and ignore other things is just a fact of life, of having a private media landscape, where I think the bright line for us is not having the government involved. To me, just the fact that there's something, it's Ofcom, it's called, right? Is the media regulator in England. Like, we don't, that itself would be outrageous to us, that to even have that exist. The DSA, this idea that platforms have to submit to the judgments of quote unquote trusted flaggers, that's crazy. The Online Safety Act is something that people would revolt like violently about in the United States if they were try to implement that here.
For those people who haven't been following it, the Online Safety Act is a British bill of Parliament. Its intention is supposed to be dealing with dangerous things on the internet, basically, which includes a lot of, you would think, laudable areas like suicide guides or content directed at minors, sexual content, those kinds of things, where most people possibly, I don't know how much of a free speech absolutist you are, but most people would say that, pedophile content shouldn't be allowed.
Yeah, but that stuff's already illegal.
Right.
It was already illegal in your country. So
guides about suicide, those kinds of things. That's another point that people talk a lot about, that, early teens can go on the internet and basically learn how to kill themselves, and have done so in a number of cases. That seems, especially considering it affects minors, seems a legitimate area for the government to be activated on, ? I mean, would you be on board for that?
So pedophilia is clearly against the law. It's against the law here in the United States. You can't solicit minors online. There are some assisted suicide laws that would come into play with that kind of thing. Like, I think we'll find that some of the new AI tools are probably breaking the law when they advise kids in a certain direction, or they give them instructions on how to tie nooses and things like that. We had a case here in the United States that's currently being litigated against ChatGPT. I think the company will probably lose that case here in the States. The problem I have, and we saw this repeatedly with all of these online speech laws, is that they're always packaged as this is meant to help protect children, protect national security, protect X, Y, and Z. And then there's always a corner of the law that has to do with something more amorphous and allows for policing of opinion and politics and stuff like that. And for me, that's just a red line. You can't cross that. You can't have the government be in that business. Now, again, that's unique to the United States. We don't believe the government has any role in that, and we also believe that the remedy for these things is better speech. Now, that may not be effective in this current environment. It might be true that the internet, that these tools are so powerful that our old ideas about that are no longer true. But
so if that's right, what do you do? I mean, if the old idea of better speech is no longer working, what do we as a society do?
So I just disagree with that. Like, I think what we've seen in the United States, we see it already with the collapse of a lot of legacy media institutions in the U.S. It may take a while, but what ends up happening is the media is a trust business. When people find that things aren't true, they eventually depart media sources, and those sources will lose influence over time. And that's happened on both the left and the right. People forget this, that when Donald Trump was running for president in 2016, the entire conservative media landscape rose as one. The mighty Fox News, in addition to the National Review and 20 other organizations, they all tried to say no to Donald Trump, stop him from being elected. But what happened in that moment is that the accumulated distrust that had been built over years with those audiences, like they understood that they were being manipulated or coddled over the years. And in that key moment, they didn't listen. Right. And so that's what happens when you lie to your audiences, when you tell them things that aren't true. Eventually I think truth wins out. It's an ancient concept that, if you've read Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart, right? The truth always rises to the surface. I believe that implicitly. Maybe it's an article of faith, but I still think it's true.
Matt, I really hope you're right on that point, because that basically is the fundamental point. Is it still true that truth wins out? Because if you spend time on X every day and you see that the people who are least interested in the truth are doing the best, gaining the biggest audiences, and those audiences really don't seem to care whether something is true. They're example after example. Every day I see it. They just want whatever fits the vibe, fits their particular grievance. And so right now it feels that we feel quite far away from that moment of reckoning. I guess you have to believe that in the longer term there will come some kind of correction, but
well, just to take an example, but this is always the case, right? So once upon a time, MSNBC soared to the top of the ratings in the United States for the first time in 20 plus years. Fox had been number one, and it had been number one for a very logical reason, which is that the conservative media landscape is not splintered on television in the United States, whereas the kind of center-left media landscape is. So CNN and MSNBC, they're competitors to one another. Fox really isn't. So it had been at the top for a long time. But at the beginning of the Trump-Russia scandal, when people thought that Trump was a Russian agent and Rachel Maddow was on there every day saying things that have turned out to be completely false, she shot to the top of the ratings. It was a huge moneymaker for the network. And now we see what happens. The boomerang has come back. The network has been exposed, and they're firing people left and right because they can't afford it anymore, right? So I still, as a lifelong journalist who believes, and I've seen this in my own career, that you win or lose audience based on how accurate you are over time, and the short-term fixes don't last.
Do you feel that the injection of AI into this paradigm changes that fundamentally? I mean, I saw just yesterday, as a little case study, a guy called Mike Benz. Both of us know someone who's done a lot of interesting work on kind of suppression of speech. In my view, sometimes gets a little over-imaginative. Posted something about the UK with a clearly AI photograph. It was the Mall in front of Buckingham Palace filled with people waving flags all the way to the end. And if you looked closely, it wasn't actually the correct building at the end. It was actually the Arc de Triomphe from Paris that had been put there. So it even had a little error in it. Underneath it, someone had said, at Grok, is this image real? Grok is the Elon Musk owned LLM. And it had said, yes, this image looks real. So it completely failed that test, which I thought was interesting. And within that little moment, all the thousands of people watching that, there was no kind of truth corrective. They were all just believing a completely false little tiny thing. And that is happening times tens of thousands every day. Do you think with that additional level of AI that can actually just reinforce fake things, do you still think people will kind of get to the truth and reject platforms that aren't providing them with it?
So I just think people need to become literate about it, and they are. One of the reasons why people are turning to AIs is because they no longer have confidence in Google. Google became intensely politicized after 2017. They instituted a new program called Project Owl. The way it was explained to me when I talked to them, 8 years ago, was if you searched for baseball, for instance, in 2015 or 2014, it might give you your local Little League team here in the States. After 2017, it gave MajorLeagueBaseball.com. In other words, it gave you the
promoted link.
The promoted authority, right? So what Google does and started to do is it started to rank your search results according to things that had a sort of establishment credentials. So even if you asked for the Trotskyite view on things, you would get a New York Times article about Trotsky as opposed to the World Socialist website, which is the leading Trotskyite authority. Now that's very disfiguring in terms of how your understanding of media. So people rejected that. Now they're going to AIs where the same thing is happening. It's just done in a more informal and convincing way. Grok is one model of that, and yes, it has defects. Serious ones, I think. Although I have had the experience of getting corrections from it a couple of times, which I haven't gotten from regular media. But the same thing happens with the other AIs, which are just incorporating all the same biases that are in Google and other platforms. So and the thing that really worried me, by the way, about the moment last year was that the kind of stuff that we saw in the Twitter files were about to be handed over to AIs, right? In other words, as opposed to having people sitting there and saying, let's put this down and this up, or getting a letter from the White House saying, let's dial this down because it suppresses, vaccine enthusiasm or whatever it is, that would be done completely by automation in the future. And that, to me, is terrifying. No, because it can be done either way. It can be done in the right-wing way. It can be done in the left-wing way. It can be done in any direction. And it's the tool that's the problem. It's not the person, I don't think.
So your remedy basically is just people need to be better educated, more skeptical. They need to not believe anything they see almost. I mean, it's a depressing conclusion in a way, but you need to teach the kids to really almost never believe things unless they have verified them themselves.
Well, what we've tried to do, like on my site, we've made a point of, it's a subtle thing. If you look at the way media reports things now, you'll notice that they very often don't link to the primary sources anymore. And that's true on conservative media and on kind of center-left media like the New York Times. They've stopped sending you to the Inspector General report that talks about what actually happened. You don't get to see the legal document, the complaint, where the actual quote comes from. I've encouraged people to learn, to train themselves to look for the primary source first, and to ignore all the filtering tools, because it's designed to manipulate you. And I think where we're going to end up in the end, Freddie, is in a place like the pre-internet world where people maybe tuned into the news once a day, and then after that they went to the library or they read books or whatever it was and expanded their mind in other ways. I think that will be healthier in the end if we get to that place.
That's a very hopeful point, I would say, to end on, but I just feel we need to have I promised this section on UK and Europe, so let's get to it. Graham Linehan is a very talented writer of sitcom TV programs. He wrote something called Father Ted here in the UK. He's become a bit of an activist on the question of sex and gender and reality versus imagined gender roles and those kinds of things. He's a TERF, to use that expression, and therefore there's a lot of people who don't like him. Some group has gone after him and managed to get him arrested. So when he came back to the UK, he was actually met by reports, 5 policemen, by some reports armed, or at least some of them, who then arrested him and took him in for questioning based on some not very pleasant tweets that he had done some months previously. I mean, I think we probably can both agree that is absurd.
Yeah, definitely.
The piece I would add that I feel like our friends in the US may not be aware of, I should say, UnHerd, we led with a piece saying the shameful arrest of Graham Linehan on the front of our website. It almost goes without saying that it is a ridiculous thing to have happened. The piece of information I think that is interesting is that the Labour Prime Minister has condemned it, which is kind of unusual for the Prime Minister to be critical of a police action when he's technically in charge of them, as have a number of cabinet ministers. The police chief, who is these guys' direct boss, has also said, we were following the process, but the ridiculous rules were put in there by the government, words to that effect. And he had also distanced himself from it, representatives from all political parties. So here in the culture, it's pretty much universally seen as a kind of absurd outlier from an earlier, few years ago attitude that should be universally scorned, I would say.
Yes, but you will still find buried in many of the AI algorithms and in the search engine processes a bias against people who have a certain point of view on that issue, and you'll also find other points of view amplified that I don't think should be. And we've even, I think, broken the seal in a very dangerous way in the United States recently with a law in Colorado that sort of bans the practice of what they call dead naming, right?
That's calling someone who has transitioned the name they used to have before they transitioned.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's an extraordinary thing to happen in the United States, for in terms of a speech violation. I know
Will
from
that
looking.
stand though in the courts? I mean, it seems to go against the First Amendment very obviously.
Well, I think if it gets to the Supreme Court, it'll be overturned. It'll take a while. There are some other laws like it that I don't think will survive, but there's certainly a political sentiment for having them, which is new in the United States. Like we haven't had belief in hate speech laws in this country. Like that's never been a thing until about 5 years ago, where you had majorities of people believing in that, and suddenly they do. So that's interesting. Now, just to get back to your point, though, what I saw in the Twitter files is that on that particular issue, there were algorithmic processes that push people like Graham Linehan down for retweeting the wrong kinds of people, for instance. Like that would be a way to lose traffic. And I do think that that's probably still built into a lot of the speech laws around the world. I would suspect, for instance, well, I shouldn't talk out of school. I'm going to guess that there are some countries that still have some prohibitions about that sort of thing in there. So
Right. I mean, these things have worked their way into bureaucracies, to HR departments, to algorithms, to media codes of conduct. It's fine. I think your point is well made. It's fine for me to stand here and say, okay, we've kind of turned the page on this. The mood is different. And I think at the forefront, where the kind of ideas are being argued about every day, that is true. But there is a long tail behind it that will probably take years to clean out, where a lot of these ideas just got baked in.
yeah, and that's what I've been trying to stress with this story since I got involved with it, is pay attention to what the institutional process is. Try to avoid focusing on the people because they're temporary. What matters is what is the bureaucratic thing that stays in place? What is the government agency that stays in place? What NGOs that are continually funded stay in place? And I think there's still some attitudes in those places, along those lines. It was very difficult. You saw last week we had this incident in the United States with that shooter in Minnesota. This is a person who is anatomically male, who only changed because of a verbal declaration when he was 17 years old. In his own diaries was renouncing that declaration, and yet every newspaper in the country was afraid to use the pronoun him. There were even corrections on NPR when somebody used the term madman or gunman. So yeah, it's still there. It's just and that's how things like the Graham thing happen, I think.
Final question for you, Matt. If we are to defeat the forces of censorship, and many of the people who believe in a more censorious approach are good people, I would say, who just are very frightened and dismayed by what they see on places like social media and feel like the world would be a better place if you sacrifice some of that free speech value in exchange for other values they think are more important. How do we win that argument when places like X, which have been such a kind of showcase for a quote-unquote free speech approach, have become such sewers? It's so depressing what you see there. And a lot of people will come to there and think, if this is what the free speech guys produce when they get to create their world, I don't want it. Well, let's go in the other direction. Okay, it may have been politically correct and overly, cleansed by weird bureaucrats and sinister in all sorts of ways, but at least it wasn't constant overt racism and nastiness and anti-Semitism and this and that and just a place that you don't want to be. How do we win that argument? And do you think things like Twitter are helping?
I don't know that things like Twitter are helping. I just think, my attitude is, and again, I hate to keep stressing this, but my perspective on this is different. We're trained to just simply not consume that kind of media and to resist the idea, because implicit in the idea that that sewer on X needs to be maybe regulated somehow, implicit in that idea is that not me, but somebody else might be affected by it, right? And so we need to make sure that person, that more impressionable other person, is protected. Our attitude toward that, or my attitude toward that, is be responsible for yourself. Learn to be literate about media. If it offends you, turn it off. That'll cut off some of the oxygen for it. And assume that other people are adults. Like I think the thing that makes the right so radicalized on this issue and so angry is this sense of being talked down to, that there needs to be this sort of nanny state that tells you what kind of content is appropriate for you to read because you're not smart enough to digest it. Like there is an element of that, and that is incredibly angering. I think I would even say that Donald Trump would not be in office if it were not for that attitude. Like, people were voting against that attitude when they put him in office last year. So don't do that. Like, that doesn't help. People are going to have different opinions. They're going to have different beliefs. In my experience, racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, it's not a winning argument in the end. It tends not to be as lasting as other ways of looking at the world. And so I just have faith that those things lose. I mean, I know that's not a great answer, but that's my answer.
It's a strong answer, and I hope you're right. I think it sounds like quite a liberal answer in terms of there's a faith in progress there behind your answer that
I hope so.
We'll see if our viewers share. I thought it was absolutely fascinating anyway. Matt, thank you so much for talking it through with me.
Thanks so much, Freddie, and hope to talk to you again.
That was Matt Taibbi, someone who originally came from the political left, has been sort of associated with the libertarian right at different times, but throughout has kept his own North Star, which is free speech, free expression, and rejection of any kind of government interference in it. I thought that was, as ever, interesting, and I learnt a lot. I hope you did too. Thanks to Matt, and thanks to you for joining. This was UnHerd.